here we are on this day where there was reportedly going to be a vote on voting rights in the Senate today. Last time I read, it was 6:40 p.m. today. They're going to vote. There are a lot of speeches that are going to happen today. President Joe Biden has a speech planned as well. Little bit of somewhat breaking news. One of the senators, Mark Kelly of Arizona, it's been reported that he is not for changing the rules or finding a carve out around the filibuster, along with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. But he released a statement a few hours ago saying that, quote, if campaign finance and voting rights reforms are blocked again this week, I will support the proposed changes to pass them with a majority vote. Protecting the vote by mail-in system used by majority of Arizonans and getting dark money out of our elections is too important to let fall victim to Washington dysfunction. Whether the Senate fails or succeeds in passing this legislation, I will continue doing this job, but as I promised Arizonians, delivering results by working with Republicans and Democrats. So Mark Kelly says basically he's open to a carve out around the filibuster. Joe Manchin has said no. Kyrsten Sinema has said no. And Chuck Schumer has felt like it's important to have this vote and for people to see, for Americans to see their senators explicitly saying that they will not find a way to pass voting rights. Some folks are calling it performative, that it's a waste. Amisha, your thoughts?
I agree with those folks. It is performative. It's not going to change the electoral chances of those who are currently seated in office. Quite frankly, one of the reasons why many don't want to change the filibuster is because they know they can go back home and campaign on not doing it and still be able to win. I think that we have to be very real about where we are right now in this country. And we live in a country where the filibuster, this relic of a civil rights struggle, this relic of the post-slavery era, is one in which a lot of people who don't look like any of us on this panel are willing to put everything on the line for. And I think that tells us more about the American people, American white people, and what they want to stand for and what they don't. Because we also have to remember that Manchin and Sinema are not the only people who don't want to see a carve out. It's basically the entire Republican Party, even those who have lifted the filibuster before. But it is also a majority of, well, not a majority, but a lot more in the Democratic Party as well, who are using Manchin and Sinema to basically hide behind while they take the fire out front. We know that there are estimates of 10 to 12, possibly more Democrats. Quite frankly, the numbers just aren't there for Biden. And having that conversation in Atlanta did not help. At the end of the day, if anything, it just made people more fiery, angry. When you actually call races racist, regardless of what party they happen to be a part of, they apparently get more racist. They dig in their heels and they get offended. So I think that, he's dealing with that.
Hold on. When you call racist, they get more racist. I love that. That's a quote. Put that on Twitter, y'all. When they call racist, they get more racist. Go ahead.
He's dealing with that fallout. But the other issue is this. We have sugarcoated this for far too long. Yes, this is an attack on Black people. Yes, this is an attack on younger voters. Yes, this is an attack on diverse voters and voters who are in indigent populations and things like that. But this is also an attack on our democracy writ large. If you don't have free and open access to voting, you do not have a democracy. Point blank, period. We essentially have a Democratic Party that is way too afraid to step forward and do what needs to be done to ensure that these issues don't keep arising. But we also have to remember where it came from. It's not just a Joe Biden issue, which has upset me personally about where the advocacy has been aimed towards. It's been attacking of this president when it should have also come towards Congress in and of itself, because we do have issues within the Senate around this on both sides of the aisle. But bigger than that, this is the states. We have a hyper vigilant states across the country who have utilized states' rights to basically strip voters of their voting rights, and they've been doing it for generations. If we had more Democrats at the state level in states across this country, if Democratic voters showed up for state level elections and didn't only vote every 4 years, if the DNC promoted these state level races instead of only investing in races every 4 years, we would see a very different outcome and turnout. We have to know that those local elections and those local races matter. Republicans have always had a local strategy. That's why we see them, being hypervigilant at the county level. That's why we see them trying to move to have local elected officials be able to basically circumvent whoever actually wins an election if they don't appreciate that person and basically swipe that win away from them. That's what is about to happen. And Right now, quite frankly, Joe Biden cannot do anything about it. The numbers are not in his favor. The votes aren't there. We can hear 5,000 speeches from here to next week. And at the end of the day, voting rights as we know it is basically dead.
Keith, what are your thoughts about this day, the strategy with the Democrats? What are your thoughts?
Well, I wrote a Washington Post op-ed about this last week that was critical of the Biden administration for waiting until the last minute to make this a priority. And yes, Amisha is correct that there are limits to what the president can do. There are limits to what the party can do when you have unanimous Republican opposition to voting rights, which is, by the way, a dramatic shift from the Republican Party just 14, 15 years ago in 2006 when George W. Bush signed the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, and that passed nearly unanimously in the Senate by bipartisan vote of Republicans and Democrats. And so we're in this position today where it feels as though Joe Biden, yes, he's getting the brunt of the criticism for this, but it feels as though he missed an opportunity, in my opinion, to focus on this issue from the very beginning. Yes, COVID was a crisis. Yes, the economy is and has been in crisis, but voting rights is the existential issue that confronts not only his presidency, but his party and democracy itself. You know, Joe Biden went to Atlanta last week and gave that speech and said that this is a battle for the soul of America. Well, if it is a battle for the soul of America, then act like it, fight like it. You can't just sit back and pretend like this is not an issue that demands your complete and full attention. If you look at what you quoted from the beginning from Mark Kelly, you know, Mark Kelly is a senator from Arizona.
Yeah.
And who else is a senator from Arizona? Kyrsten Sinema.
Yes.
And, you know, people are saying, well, Kyrsten Sinema is looking at the politics in her state and she can't possibly support this because of the well, Mark Kelly is a senator from the same state and he's finding a way to support it. So that should tell us that Kyrsten Sinema's argument doesn't really hold water. And Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, I know they're not the only two people who are responsible for holding this up, but they are the two people who are front and center, willing to take the heat within the Democratic Party, while the rest of the Republican Party hasn't really taken as much heat because it's just assumed that they're going to be opposed to voting rights. They should be called out for that. So I actually disagree a bit from Misha's take in that I actually think it's okay. I think it's a good idea for the Senate to vote on this. I think they should be voting on this every day, voting on some sort of voting rights bill every day. Let people actually not just have a discussion, but vote to whatever extent they can to put people on the record. Now, of course, the Republicans have the ability to filibuster, but they don't have the ability to filibuster an actual discussion, an actual debate, which is something we have today because the House passed this measure to combine the Freedom to Vote Act with the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So I know it's complicated to people, like hasn't this come up several times before, but they have this legislative maneuver that's designed to bypass the filibuster, at least to have a debate. Whether that ends with an actual vote, I'm not sure.
And I'm not against them going on the record. What I am arguing is that for those who are expecting this to come out or possibly have some type of positive outcome towards alleviating some of these voting restrictions in states across the country, that's not going to happen. We're going to see them go on record. We already know what the stance is for the majority of them anyway, because they've been vocal. With that being said, we're going to see them go on record. It's not going to change the minds or opinions. And they're not going to move forward on anything that they hadn't already decided they were going to dig in their heels on. The people who are pro are going to remain pro. Those who are against are going to remain against. Those who don't want any type of fallout are going to vote present per usual. And nothing is going to change in Georgia, Florida, Texas, Ohio, or any of these other states that have decided that they are going to restrict voting rights. That just is what it is. Having them on record, running this in media circles is one thing, but for those individuals who are wondering whether or not a polling place is going to exist in their neighborhood, whether or not they're going to be required to show ID, essentially have a poll tax, whether or not they're going to have voter intimidation while they are going to these polling places to vote, whether or not their vote is actually going to count because some county elected official decides that the Republican on that docket didn't win. So now it's time to basically choose somebody else. I think that the negating of the votes as well is going to be a problem. And this, counting of votes or, argumentation on the Hill is not going to change any of that because the numbers are what they are. And I think we already know what congressional math is here.
Well,
you know where I struggle though? Go ahead, Keith. Go ahead.
The numbers are definitely what they are. But what I feel, the big error I think that the Biden administration has made is that they haven't turned up the temperature. They haven't raised the heat on this issue. And they could have done that from the very beginning. People say, well, what else can he do? He's got his own members of Congress who don't support it. He's got the whole Republican parties against him. Well, you know what? Fight like it matters as much as you say it matters. Go to Congress and deliver a speech to the joint session of Congress. Go to Joe Manchin's West Virginia, even though he doesn't want you to go there, and campaign for this, and campaign for your other items in the agenda, including Build Back Better, which will directly benefit the people of Virginia, but is being held up because of the filibuster. Go to Arizona and campaign for this, and call Kyrsten Sinema out on what she's not doing. The president still has the power of the bully pulpit. And I think the problem I have with the Biden administration approach to this is that they're taking this sort of, well, we're going to all figure it out, negotiate and get along. That's baloney. We don't have the time or opportunity to do that. You got to get in there and be tough and be aggressive, even if you offend a few people in the process. I think that's what Joe Biden needs to do, needs to give up. I talked about this, I think, last week about bipartisanship, giving up the fantasy of bipartisanship. But he also has to give up the fantasy of collegiality within the Democratic Party. People want to, if you want Democrats, you want the base of voters to turn out in the 2022 midterms, you got to give them something to vote for. We can't show up in 2022 in November and say, hey, we don't have any deliverables, but hey, the Republicans.
Yeah, but Keith, I think it's unfair to say there have been no deliverables this first year.
I didn't say no deliverables, but who is the most loyal constituency of the Democratic Party? Black
voters.
What are the deliverables for Black voters? That's what I'm saying. Yes, they could deliver for middle America, for white voters and all that. And some of those things, of course, obviously benefit Black people, but there hasn't been any sort of real effort to focus on the specific issues that directly affect Black people. No George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, no John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act or For the People Act, no Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. I mean, we can't even about the issues that are important to Black people because we have to always wait for the issues that are important for other people first.
But I will say that we do have more Black judges appointed to the circuit courts rather than any other president in their first year in history. For me, that's really important, considering what we saw with what Trump tried to do to overturn the election, and there was a lot of Obama judges that blocked him. So that's important to me, that I think we had the highest proposals for HBCUs than any other president in history. That's important to me as well. And there have been a lot of executive orders, especially when he pulled back the patriotic education ban, penalties for anybody who's doing racial sensitivity training, getting federal contracts.
I don't think it was that there have not been deliverables, because we can say there have been deliverables that have helped Black people. The ones you just mentioned, and the extended child tax credits at the time that we had them, in addition to the extended unemployment, all of these things that were holistically helpful, I think, not just for Black people, but our society as a whole. But with that being said, we know that the share of individuals who were really suffering, because Black people were suffering pre-pandemic, but we're going to suffer the most during the pandemic, were largely Black people. So any amount of relief that came from that was going to be helpful. With that being said, the bigger issue that this administration has is that they have not been able to make a conclusive message. They have not been able to carry a message of his victories. They have not been able to do, as Keith spoke a moment ago, and speak specifically to how those policy measures help Black people. I think that he is confused, or his administration has fallen on its face in regards to how they communicate with their voters, particularly their most prized base, which would be the African American population, and having those conversations and touting consistently, because Republicans do this all the time. They'll tell you about a victory they had 12 years ago every single day. We don't have that same thing happening from the Biden administration. Meanwhile, you see, him getting gobsmacked about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. We see the emergence of Omicron, the emergence of Delta. We see the testing issues. We see the inflation issues. We see that, the average American is not very happy, and not Black people included as well. But with that being said, we also have to recognize that this administration basically did what they were polled to do. The polling didn't say voting rights was a top level issue for Americans. The polling still doesn't say voting rights is a top level issue for Americans, because quite frankly, it's not a top level issue for Americans. The same people who are mad about January 6th did not draw the line between January 6th and the attack that basically came because more Black people voted in that election, more Black people voted in counties, specifically suburban areas across this country, that really were able to make that decision, that were the areas that Trump also decided that he was going to challenge in courts. The whole reason January 6th happened was because of a big lie spread by this president, because he wanted to thwart the votes of African Americans across America. I think that if there was a better trajectory in terms of driving home that very important detail of how we got here, we would see a different outcome. But with that being said, we can't take away the focus that this administration has, quite frankly, done a lot for Black communities. They just have not talked about it at all. It is just like a tree falling in the forest and nobody hears it. That is exactly what's happening right now.
I'm not
sure.
Go ahead, Keith. I'm not sure I agree that this administration has done a lot for Black communities. I think they've done I don't think they've been negative toward the Black community anyway, like the Trump administration was. They haven't been hostile to, but I think they've missed a lot of opportunities. Even when you talk about something like the child care tax credit, which definitely has a benefit to African Americans, that expired at the end of December 2021. Because the point that I think that they're not making, and the reason why voting rights is not a top priority issue, is because people don't understand that voting rights is connected to all those other issues that people want to accomplish. You can't have a minimum wage increase if you don't deal with the voting rights issue. You can't expand healthcare if you don't deal with the voting rights issue. You can't deal with immigration or crime or gun control or any of those things that are important. You can't deal with any of those issues until you deal with the issue of voting rights, not just voting rights in terms of the people in the United States, but also voting rights in the United States Senate. The fact that we don't have a majority system in the United States Senate is a problem. All that has to be discussed, and the president has to make it a priority. So look, this is the point I'm trying to make. I'm not saying Biden is a horrible president or Biden hasn't accomplished anything. I understand he has. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But I am saying that people want to see their president as a fighter. And they do not see that from Joe Biden. They do not see him fighting for the things that they believe in. If they did, then maybe they'd be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. But up until now, I haven't seen it. And I don't think that the American people have seen it either. And the base hasn't seen it, which is the reason why his base support has eroded.
You know, I'm going to say this, then we'll head to a break. You know where I struggle, and maybe I'm just caught in between. I hear what you're saying, Keith, and I hear what you're saying, Amisha. I think what outrages me, and maybe nobody cares about this anymore, is that in January of 2018, Trump's approval rating was 39%. That first year of the Trump administration, every year was, but that first year was particularly awful. Jeff Sessions, all the rollbacks to police reforms, I can go on and on. Biden's approval rating right now is 33%. It's 33% with unemployment down, with now having rapid in-home tests coming to people's doorsteps. And this is outside of specific Black issues. This is just 33. It's lower than Trump in his first year. And that is a juxtaposition that just kind of outrages me, because I don't care if you're Black, white, brown, whatever, you can't tell me that we're not in a better space than we were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And so let me say this, Keith. And this is where I struggle, because I've been on these airwaves critiquing Biden. And maybe I'm wrong here. But the other side of it is the Republican voters, the Republican media, they were loyal to Trump. They were loyal to him.
And it was reflected in the polling numbers. That just is what it is.
I just wonder, do we, I mean, I could be wrong, but Clay, I just say, damn, am I helping? Go ahead, Keith.
You're making my point. Donald Trump had a base of 39, 40, 42% that was never going to abandon him no matter what. And you know why? Because he represented their interests. They saw him as a fighter. He was willing to go.
But he didn't deliver.
He was going.
It didn't matter. Yeah, it's about what they see and what they
perceived as willing to go. He was perceived as willing to go out and fight those liberals, those progressives, those black people, those Mexicans, those Muslims and immigrants. He was perceived as a fighter. And that's why his base never abandoned him. That's my point. If Joe Biden was perceived as the same sort of fighter, he wouldn't have lost some of the support he's lost from his base. Yes, there's the loyal Democrats who will support any Democrat no matter what, and those people are fine. But that's not enough to win in the midterm in 2022 when turnout is usually low, and you need enthusiasm. What are people enthusiastic about? That's what I'm saying. He needs to be seen as fighting. Regardless of whether he wins or loses, he needs to be seen as a fighter. That's how you stay in office.
You know what's interesting?
I would probably say the other piece is factions. We know that amongst the voting populace, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, those things exist. People who are more conservative than the base, people who are more liberal than the base. Trump, in his craziness and the semblance that he happened to be, was able to bring all of those people together. We are not seeing that from Joe Biden. And part of that I do think is a media push, because everyone, kind of aligned behind the same situation where with Trump, in the way that we aren't seeing it with Joe Biden. He's been attacked pretty much equally from, your Fox News audience as well as your MSN or CNN audience.
Yeah, and Trump wasn't attacked equally.
For him was very, very short. But with
very short.
I also think that we have an issue where, again, communication perception is key to what Keith just said. At the end of the day, it has not been that fight, that energy, that push around Joe Biden doesn't really exist. And I can't say that it ever really did. I think that what people were voting for was a push against Donald Trump. What people came out for was a push against, the authoritarianism and the crazy that they saw there, a push against him not having a COVID-19 plan, a push against his ridiculousness towards the end of that campaign. It was never around Joe Biden. I think that is, the chickens are coming home to roost now. He was never extremely popular.
And also, let me just say this, we have to go to break. But Keith, if we did have a Democratic president who was a fighter like a Trump, I don't know if a Democratic president could do that. I don't know if a Democratic president could be as bombastic as a Trump. I don't know if that, then they were, oh my God, he's if Biden was as crazy as Trump, or even 50% as crazy, oh my God, he's unprofessional. And I don't even know if that would work. I don't know. Final comment, then we'll go to a break.
I don't know if anybody could be as crazy as Trump, but the examples I mentioned in my Washington Post piece were one, LBJ and FDR. I think I mentioned those last week. I told you.
Yeah.
FDR said, he got out there in 1936 and he said that the forces of opposition are united in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred. We celebrate FDR as this grand figure, as a hero. He wasn't a uniting figure. He was a divisive figure. He welcomed the hatred of his enemies, and he was perceived as a fighter. And that's the reason why people went in and they supported him.